Okay, so this is our first project, assignment number 1, the rudiments of representation. In this particular technique, we're doing what we're called the layering painting, or the layer painting, or the direct-indirect technique. We're going to be using only our black and white, so your titanium and your Mars, to create a grayscale palette. A palette is a selection of colors. So we're going to be using black and white to mix grayscale in order to translate what we're seeing in color into a palette that only includes grays, black and white. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll look at our still life. We'll concentrate on the elements of line and shape in order to arrive at the proper scale, proportion, and composition. So we're thinking compositionally here. We're going to zoom in and draw these things at a larger scale on our image. We're going to try to go for accurate proportion. And of course, proportion has everything to do with analyzing line and shape. Trying to get a sense of the way things look is all about detecting their relationships of point, line, and plane, or point, line, and shape. And of course, this is where drawing comes into the equation. Drawing almost always precedes painting. So we're going to try to create a composition where there's just one dominant and emphasized focal object. There'll be other objects, but there'll be a single dominant object. At most two, but we want to try to go for an emphasized focal object. Also, try to keep from having too many objects. Don't, have a focal point but then have 20 other objects around it. That's possible, but in this particular project, we just want you to focus on a few, maybe 3 or 4 at the most. Finally, try not to have any of the superfluous background space, that is, aspects of the room around the still life. So this would be a particular point of view from a particular easel. You don't want to draw everything you're seeing here. Say if you decided to draw this skeleton, you wouldn't want to draw it at this scale, because then you're going to have all of these other objects, the room, what are you going to do in all of these negative spaces? So you want to kind of zoom in and try to think about how can I reduce both the negative space of the room and the number of objects. This is better, but I would still say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different things. Too much. This is better. Now we're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things. Does this count as an object? Well, yes and no. I would say that more so these are objects. So these negative spaces you can kind of delete as objects. So I was being hyperbolistic earlier when we were looking at this and counting all of this negative space. But still, you get the idea. We're trying to have, this as our focal object, and then have spatial overlap, things that are partial versus things that are whole. Maybe. It depends on what type of composition that you're going for. For instance, here, nothing is really whole, but I'm definitely being pulled towards this area of the composition because I'm seeing most of this jug, and it's human, and it's kind of surrounded by these two middle values, whereas it's a light value. The skull in the foreground is important, but because it's in the foreground and because it's so cropped, it becomes ambiguous. Here would be another composition. Here we're kind of getting a triangular movement, which is not bad, but I would say here we have 2 focal points. So you're just kind of thinking about how you can crop the composition as to have a single 1 or maybe 2 at the most focal points, few objects, and very little of the negative space in the background. The next thing that you're going to do, and I'm sorry I went too fast there, is, and this is part 1, this is what we're going to be doing today, this will be what is due before the next class, is making 4 thumbnail sketches in your sketchbook. This is where you decide on your composition, This is what you decide your cropping, the scale, what you're going to depict, where it's going to be placed on your support. These should be abbreviated, loosely refined. Make certain you explore 4 very different points of view. These are some examples of thumbnails, Rembrandt up top, an architectural sketch in the bottom. And these are some of my examples. So I looked at those photographs that I took and I created little rough thumbnails. I used pen. I did a lot of hatching in them. It's very loose. You can see I'm kind of moving things around. I think you can recognize some of the photographs that I was working from. Here's a larger one. So same larger version. I'm kind of leaning towards this one, though I'm not sure yet, because I also like this one. There's something kind of spooky and scary about this one. And this one is this image, but we've cropped in a little bit more to about right here. So I haven't decided which one I'm going to do yet. Probably either this one or this one. But you can see I am dealing with value, but it's very rough. I think what's most important is thinking, where's my light, where's my dark, where's my grays? And, of course, composition. Next, we're going to look at the element of value, which is, of course, the element by which an artist compares or quantifies light and shadow on the objects he or she is depicting. This can be black, white, gray objects, or color objects. So you're translating these values of each object, both the local and the actual values, into a grayscale palette. And by duplicating these, by representing these, you're going to give your still life a sense of light, mass, space, as well as texture. Each object first has a local value, and then it also has a value range. The local value is like red sheet, white skull, black box. That's the local value. But each object has a value range, and that range is the change of value each object undergoes, or the gradation of value each object has on it as it moves from light into shadow. So if we go back to our photographs, blue vase, red drapery, green plant, white clay, orange cup, gray cup, black box, dark blue, dark green, light peachy color, middle range orange, gray, and red. All of these are the local values. The actual values are the fact that this is lighter and this is darker. Dark to light. Light to dark. Light to dark. A modulation of light to dark to darker to light to dark to light to dark to darker yet. So these are the actual values that we're observing. This is, of course, a value scale. So what you're looking at is, first, if an object is dark, it's going to be, like a black object will be black in its local value. A light object will be white in its local value. That red blanket is middle gray in its local value. But it has a range of tone. That vase or skull has a range of tone. A black object like the box has a range of tone, and that's the actual value. So when you're looking at a painting, you're looking at the fact that this is a dark brown. These are white bottles. This is a dark glass. This is black fabric. This is a red candle. But it's been translated into objects that have, for instance here, gradations from light or white into light gray into middle gray, versus having mostly blacks, middle grays, and dark grays with little specular highlights of white, versus this, which is predominantly this kind of local middle gray with some lighter grays, some darker grays in the texture, and kind of a dull sheen. This, by the way, is an example of this first project by a student. The next step in our part one, which is the assignment for today, which is due at the next class, just in case you didn't hear me the first time, is to complete a value study. This is where you observe the local values of the object in your composition, and it refers to the general unmodulated value or color of each object. This is not about a subtlety or range of light and shadow, but a kind of average of the value. So again, a dark object, a light object, a middle object. Choose your best thumbnail, make it bigger, maybe even a whole sketchbook page, and use a pencil or a charcoal pencil. So this would be a grid of a thumbnail, which would be expanded to a full sketchbook page. And you can see here they've kind of gone over everything with this middle gray value first, and then you've got the white segregated here on the focal point. Then they're pushing these darker planes into a dark gray, leaving the middle gray in these areas, leaving the white in these areas, pushing the darks in the deep shadows. Then as we move around that, creating even more of a dark tone. And this really helps you to get kind of a tonal map, which as you can see creates a nice sense of space. So this is your value study. That's what you're going to do with the best of your 3 thumbnails. So this is what we're going to do in class today. And again, these are going to be due at the beginning of next class. Before the class starts, you're going to upload these to D2L. I'll give you all of the pertinent information about the location of your upload and timing on that, as well as how to photograph your work. I'll give you a video on that and titling, etc. in our running calendar, which I'll send through email.